again, basic overview. This is where Hong Kong is on the map. It's in the southern part of China, as you can see. The name Hong Kong is right here, the second two characters, Shangang in Mandarin. And the top three characters are Tanshanshan, which means Honolulu in Chinese. Does anyone know what this picture is?
A garden of Victoria Gardens?
No, this is actually in Hawaii. And do you know what kind of tree this is?
Avocado tree.
No. Sandalwood. Who said that? Sandalwood tree. And so Sandalwood Mountain is what Honolulu means. Sandalwood Mountain. And Hong Kong is called the Fragrant Harbor. Sandalwood means altar fragrance, which makes sense because it's used to make incense, right? So one of the theories as to how Hong Kong got its name, so as we all know in the 1830s, before the 1830s, the kings of Hawaii were chopping down the sandalwood forests and sending those cargoes to, China. So where in China were they sending them to? They were sending them to the Fragrant Harbor. So one of the theories is that Hong Kong is actually named after Honolulu. All right. And this is what Hong Kong looked like. This is the earliest known depiction of Hong Kong in the 1840s when the British first got there. Famously, it was. So what happened was. So why is Hong Kong significant? Well, it all starts with this plant. Opium.
Opium.
Very good. This is the poppy. And when you slit open the opium poppy, it releases this milky sap that can then be processed into opium and opioids. And so the British were selling this to the Chinese. The Chinese didn't like, the drug dealing, and so they prohibited the sale of opium. And then the British went to war. The first Opium War ended in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanjing. And this is a map of Hong Kong. The dark blue island is Hong Kong Island. Okay, and in 1842, the British get the Chinese to cede Hong Kong Island in perpetuity to the United Kingdom. The Second Opium War happens in 1860. You see the light blue peninsula? That's the Kowloon Peninsula. In 1860, China cedes the Kowloon Peninsula up to a street that's still there called Boundary Street to the United Kingdom in perpetuity. And then they want more, so then in 1898, they sign a lease for 99 years for all the light blue area, which is called the New Territories. So this is how Hong Kong becomes part of the United Kingdom, starting in 1842. And it's a colony until that 99 years expires in 1997.
Yeah, I remember that.
But we were just talking about the trade war earlier between the United States and China. So what happened was in the 1980s, Governor MacLehose of Hong Kong started to worry about, what was going to happen in 1997 because he was developing the new territories. And at the time, actually, the United Kingdom and the United States were kind of in a de facto alliance with China against the Soviet Union. And so they agreed to give everything back to China in 1997, including the ceded parts, with a Chinese guarantee that the Hong Kong way of life would remain until 50 years later, so until 2047. And so that's the period that we're in today. The period we're in year, 20-something of that 50-year period where Hong Kong is technically a part of China, but it still has this unique way of life, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and so on, that the British gave them during the colonial occupation period. All right, so this is how Hong Kong looks overlaid onto Oahu. It's actually smaller, significantly smaller than Oahu, including the new territories, including all the outlying islands, and the population is over 7 times that of Oahu. Okay, you guys saw the map of Singapore earlier. Singapore is half the size, less than half the size of Oahu. The difference between Singapore and and Hong Kong is that Singapore is basically all developed. There's no conservation land in Singapore, with small exceptions. In Hong Kong, as you will see later, most of the land is conservation. In fact, a similar proportion of Hong Kong's land is in conservation or agriculture as Oahu. Right? So you think of Oahu with the green hills and the green mountains and green center of the island. That's the same for Hong Kong. Only a tiny fraction of the land in Hong Kong is developable. So they squeeze, all that population onto a developed area that's even smaller than that of Oahu.
Now, when you say developable, that's because the government made that decision, right?
Correct.
Right.
And the government is authoritarian also. One of the big issues is universal suffrage. They actually have universal suffrage, everyone can vote. What they don't have is the ability to nominate their candidates for chief executive. The government nominates them, and then the voters get to vote on which of the handpicked candidates. Okay, so because it's a British colony, you have waves of refugees into Hong Kong from mainland China, especially in 1949 when the communists take over mainland China. This causes the Hong Kong population to really explode. What also becomes very important, especially after 1949, is that Hong Kong is a major trading port. At certain points, it's been the #1 trading port in the world. Right now, I think it's #2, only to Shanghai. And trade is still really kind of the bedrock of Hong Kong's existence. That's why the British wanted it in 1842, and that's why it's one of the world's great powerhouses today. Fun fact, economically, when the negotiation happened to return Hong Kong to China, the GDP of Hong Kong alone, this tiny territory, half the size of Oahu, was something like 30% of that of the entire People's Republic of China. It's extremely rich, and it still is extremely rich, although China's gotten
That's
very...
mainly from trade?
Yeah, well, it started with trade, right? Trade in opium and drugs. And now it's trade in containers. A lot of the world's goods happen through here. But now I think finance is probably an even bigger industry. We have a subject matter expert here, so I'll leave it up to him to address later. Okay, so we already heard about their housing market, and I'm not going to get too much into it, just a little bit. But my main purpose in taking the reason I wanted for you guys to go to Hong Kong, even though Hong Kong has the world's worst housing shortage and clearly has not solved its housing shortage, is because of its urban landscape. Okay? So does anyone know where this is? Well, I'll just tell you. Probably won't get it. This is the Barri Gotique in Barcelona. Has anyone been to Barcelona? Okay, this is the main touristy area of Barcelona. This is Greenwich Village in New York. Anyone been to the Village in New York? Okay, a lot of you guys. Anyone been to Ginza in Tokyo? Yep. Okay. Anyone been to the North End in Boston? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to use these pictures to depict my view of urban planning, because I think Hong Kong is the best urban planning in the world. What 4 things do we notice about these urban streetscapes? All right, number 1.
They're not straight.
That's true. But you know, there are some straights, right? Number 1, we have high density, right? Number 2, we have narrow streets and sidewalks, okay? Number 3, we have ground floor commercial and retail, which is not in these pictures, but if you've been to these places, tons of ground floor commercial and retail. And number 4, we have no setbacks, right? Everything is built straight up to the property line. There's no like patch of grass between the property line and the sidewalk or the road, okay? And with those 4 elements, these neighborhoods are among the most desirable, attractive, and highly valued in the world, right? These are all very expensive neighborhoods to live in and to rent commercial real estate in. Okay, and I'm not just cherry picking. No matter where you go in the world, this is Istanbul, Cairo, Taipei, Ximending. This is Le Marais in Paris. I know the mayor. Did anyone been to Le Marais in Paris? Very popular, right? This is Myeongdong in Seoul. Anyone been to Myeongdong? It's the main tourist area of Seoul, very, very popular. And this is Lisbon in Portugal, which is the Alfama, the most popular neighborhood. Yeah, anyone been there? Okay, so wherever you go in the world, these 4 commandments produce extremely desirable, extremely attractive, extremely successful neighborhoods.
Or is that because they're so desirable that they end up getting so practical?
Well, I'll show you the opposite of my 4 commandments, okay? So, before we get there, so I think the ultimate expression of the Stanley Chang commandments is this. And does anyone know where this is?
Hong Kong.
This is Kowloon in Hong Kong, okay? This red sign is a wonton shop. And I've never been to that wonton shop, but I can already tell that that's going to be the best wonton I've ever had in my life, right? Okay, remember, high density, narrow streets and sidewalks, ground floor commercial and retail, no setbacks, right? Okay, let me also make some observations about these buildings. They are not human scale. A lot of architects and planners will say we need human scale buildings, like Paris, 8 stories. These are not, these are like 20, 30-story towers, okay? But you barely notice because there's so much going on around you that you don't even look up, right? Number 2, these are not beautiful architect-designed buildings, right? These are crappy buildings that were built very cheaply with like, you know, low-cost local architects probably back in, you know, the 1950s and 60s. They've been poorly maintained, right? These are not, they don't get repainted all the time, as you can see, right? And even though they are cheap buildings that are cheaply maintained, their value has done nothing but this since the day they were built, right? These are, it's amazing the resiliency of the value when you apply the Stanley Chang commandments to these places. All right, I'm gonna get to your point next. So what's the opposite? Okay, the opposite for much of the 20th century is this vision. It's Towers in a Park. It's by this architect and urban planner named Corbusier. And the ultimate expression of Towers in a Park is, does anyone know what this is?
KPT.
KPT, right? American public housing, okay, is high density, but it has huge setbacks, very wide public rights of way, streets and sidewalks, and no, you know, ground floor retail or commercial, right? It's just residential. So we all know what happened to this, right? This is actually also in Hong Kong. We're going to be visiting this. This is Lohas Park. This is the latest and greatest development in Hong Kong. And even in Hong Kong, they have forgotten the lessons of their own most successful neighborhoods. And you can see about 2/3 of the footprint of Lohas Park is empty space, right? Is just green space. And I know green space is very popular in America, and in Hawaii in particular. But again, how much green space is there here, and how valuable and successful is it? All right, Ken.
But which comes first? Like, which is the cause and the effect, right? Because couldn't it be that as neighborhoods become more popular, they get more densely filled in, and they get more, less space? Is it that having less space makes it more popular? Like, I'm not.
Those streets, you know, it wasn't like there were wide highways going through Myeongdong and Seoul, and then they were later filled in, right? The narrow streets have always been narrow for all of those neighborhoods. And the density may have gotten a little bit higher, but I mean, you know, you saw the Alfama in Lisbon; those are hundreds of years old, right? And buildings don't get redeveloped all that often. In America, the half-life of housing, the period after which like half of a certain supply of housing gets demolished, is like 100 years. American housing lasts a very long time. And this, by the way, Lohas Park is it's 86 acres, 50 towers, and 21,500 units. You know, that's kind of the level of density that I would be imagining and the scale that I'd be imagining.
How big is the site?
Lohas Park,
How big is the site?
86 acres.
86.
Yeah, so for instance, so that's what I would be envisioning for Hawaii. So for instance, Aloha Stadium is 100 acres. So with a density of 250 units an acre, you could do 50 towers, 25,000 units. So Lohas Park is roughly comparable to that. And even with that high level of density, look how much green space they have. It's amazing. Like, that's actually not maxing out the density of that parcel. Okay, towers in a park. Another city that has truly applied towers in a park, and this might be your best counterexample, is this city. Does anyone know what this city is? This is Singapore. So I love Singapore for its public housing, but you know, this is, if you're a woman, if it weren't Singapore, okay, if you're a woman walking late at night, would you feel safe? You know, I don't think so, right? But you have the huge setbacks, you have the, you know, just tons of like huge wide highways, and you'll see that when we're in Singapore. You will see on the ground the difference between the walkable experience there, you know, their modern areas versus the walkability of traditional areas in Kowloon. Because actually, the traditional areas of Singapore, like Chinatown, are very walkable, and they follow the Chang commandments. It's really the car that kind of wrecked these commandments. All right, and you know, does anyone know what this is, by the way? This we should all be familiar with.
Kewalo Basin, I recognize.
Yeah, that's right. This is Kaka'aka. This is the Ward Village Master Plan. And I'm not singling them out because they're only doing what HCDA will let them to do, and HCDA is only letting them do what the legislature will allow it to do. The legislature is only allowing HCDA to do what the voters will allow the legislature to do. And what the voters of America and Hawaii in particular want is towers in a park. Right? They want huge setbacks. They want tons of green space. They want really wide, you know, streets and sidewalks. And so anyway, that's my little urban planning kind of, what I want you guys to see when we're there on the ground is I want you to see how vibrant, how safe, how desirable Hong Kong is by following these commandments, and how relatively sterile and unwalkable and unvibrant Singapore is as a result. Okay.
And how about Kakako? What do you think of it in terms of the towers being built and the livability and?
Oh, I think it should have more density. Actually, I'm not saying it doesn't need to have more density. It's actually pretty dense. But what it should have is less blank space. These blank grassy areas should be filled in.
That's a bogus picture. Sorry.
Well, not all of this has been built yet. This is like going to happen. This is their plan for what happens like later.
They
Years.
covered green way too much in that picture.
Well, I didn't want to pick on them because I thought Tata Po might be here. So. and it's truly not. We're not picking on them. It's truly not their. It's not their fault or credit or whatever you want to say. All right. So this is back to what we were saying about Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, they really see it as a problem that they have so much undeveloped land. Okay, they say we should just develop more land. Okay, and in Hawaii, we would not view that as a problem, right? We want to preserve as much of our agricultural and conservation land as possible. So the green is agricultural and conservation, the natural terrain it says, and the yellow is the developed area. So you can see it has a landscape that's very much like Oahu, right? It's huge amounts of undeveloped nothingness, forests and so on, which I think we should have on Oahu. I mean, I'm not advocating that we develop all over that green space. Even though many people in Hong Kong will say that they should.
You're just saying that you'd like us to use our urban lands more densely than we're using them now.
Correct.
Okay. So
Right.
you're not against green space, but you're just
No, quite the opposite. I want green space in these natural habitats. I want relatively less green space in the urban core. Which I understand is controversial, and we can have a diversity of opinions on that subject. But you will make your own decisions, right? You'll see these landscapes in person. Okay, so Hong Kong, we have to be clear, right, has the worst housing shortage in the world and has for many, many years. Ivanhoe kind of didn't really mention that, but it's just a fact, right? We're going to see some of the coffin homes later. This is another manifestation of that. This is the most expensive house that's currently on the market, I think, anywhere in the world today. Does anyone want to guess how much this house is on the market for?
250 million.
Were you in the first
300
one?
million.
No, higher.
Dang.
Yeah, I know you said it before, but
Yeah.
Yeah, Adrian nailed it. Like the first time he said it, he's like, "Do you know how expensive this house is?"
This
And
house-
he nailed it.
This house is on the market today for $446 million. And this is a teardown. It was built in 1991. It's a 4-bedroom house. And it's about 13,000 square feet. This is a lot. Okay, and so it's valuable for that 13,000 square feet of the lot. Okay, and if and when it does
It's
sell,
not that much. Not for that much.
no, the standard in Hawaii is what, a quarter acre lot in places like Hawaii Kai. So that's about a third of an acre. It's about a 10,000 square foot lot. It's kind of standard in Hawaii. That's only slightly larger than the standard house in Hawaii Kai. So this is actually selling for $27,000 per square foot. That's the asking price, which is very high. But actually, that's not a record. The highest asking price, actually, the highest sales price per square foot that's ever been realized is in the same area, the Peak, $30,000 US per square foot. Okay, so Ellen or Bob, do you know how many square feet is this apartment?
3,500.
3,500. Okay, so at $30,000 a square foot, that would be
More than we paid for it.
Would have to move out, right?
yeah, does anyone do math? Is that $10 million?
But
Paid slightly
Probably
less than that, yeah. It's got more than
$100 million? Yeah.
yeah, not 10 million. Definitely not.
Right, closer to 100.
$100 million. Okay, so that's for dirt. Right?
that's
This is
twice
all.
what we paid for it.
So that's how out of control the housing prices are in Hong Kong.
$105 million.
So I think I heard somewhere that Hong Kong artificially or purposefully keeps land prices that high?
Yes.
Because that's how their government makes money.
Yes.
Is from leasing land.
Did
So
you
they
watch this
don't-
video?
No, I didn't. I read an article or something.
Okay.
Yes, but that
This video is going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So let's
okay.
watch the video.
It did.
Oh wait.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Do we?
I think so.
Right.
It's more expensive to live in Hong Kong than any.
Sorry.
It's more expensive to live in Hong Kong than anywhere in the world.
Hong Kong has been ranked the least affordable housing market in the world 8 years in a row, and by a long shot. Housing prices are now almost 20 times more than annual income. That means that a household making $50,000 US would, on average, be looking for a house that costs $980,000. And it's getting really bad. Hundreds of thousands of residents now squeeze into incredibly small apartments, most of them no bigger than a parking space.
So these are cage homes, which basically fit one person and their belongings, and they basically stack these in a room in order to fit as many people as they can in the room.
And yet the price per square foot for these smaller houses just keeps shooting up. I visited these homes to try to piece together an explanation for this trend, and to meet the people who are being squeezed by the world's least affordable real estate market.
There are now tens of thousands of people in this city who live in spaces that are between 75 and 140 square feet. For some perspective, a typical parking space in the US is 120 square feet.
所以我困難，始終呢度係黑暗嘅，即係一入嚟到唔見唔到光噶嘛。
One of the most common strategies for small space living is this subdivided house model. This big space that's been divided up into a bunch of tiny little living spaces. These people basically have room for a bed and a table and a few belongings.
有啲就調理，有啲就求求其其咁樣。嗰啲唱 K 啊嗰啲啦，同埋啲水啊嗰啲藥品啊嗰啲，好簡單嘅。
What makes this model work is that they have a bigger communal space where they're able to have their cooking and their washing in the bathroom open to everyone so that they can save space and save money in their actual living quarters. So this is the kitchen for this space, which is shared by 4 families.
因為每個人生活習慣唔一樣啦，成日都因為好少嘅事都會有摩擦，唔 OK 咯，即係好多嘈交咯。
The tempting explanation here for why the prices are so high is land scarcity. 7.5 million people crammed into this series of islands. It's going to drive up the prices. The same story in a lot of places that have run out of land that are in high demand. Think San Francisco or New York City. Okay, this might be the story in New York City and San Francisco, but is Hong Kong actually running out of land? Let's see what the drone says about this.
Flying over Hong Kong, you start to see that while yes, there's a very dense urban landscape, there's also a whole lot of green space. Government land use data says that 75% of the land in Hong Kong is not developed. Now, some of that is mountainous and rocky and not easy to build on, but certainly not all of it. So I posed this question about density to 2 experts. One is a Hong Kong citizen and the other is a 30-plus year resident. Both are advocates for better urban design.
Are high prices primarily the result of land scarcity?
No.
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 It's not. There's a land use issue. We could also land as being inefficiently used or conserved.
The problem isn't the shortage of land. The problem is bad land management.
Land use, land management. What these experts are referring to is that of all the land in Hong Kong, only 3.7% is zoned for urban housing. But it's not because of mountains, it's because of policy. And this gets to the heart of the explanation of why more and more people are living in homes the size of parking spaces.
The first thing to note, if you want to understand the real explanation, is that the government owns all of the land in Hong Kong. Well, all except for this one church that the British built here when they ruled it back in the 1800s, and it kind of just escaped the whole government owns all the land thing.
So the government owns all the land, and it leases it out to developers, usually for 50 years, in an auction process, where the highest bidder gets the contract. With such scarce and valuable land zoned for housing, real estate companies, more and more of them coming from mainland China with lots of money, will duke it out in these auctions, and will end up at an astronomically high price.
Like this plot of land that was just leased out for $2.2 billion, which set an all-time record for the most expensive land ever leased by the Hong Kong government to a developer.
Oh my gosh.
So the way that government zones and leases land is the first part of this.
The other part of this explanation has a lot to do with taxes. If you're the type of person who navigates away from this video and hear the word tax policy, stay with me here. This place loves low taxes. It's a great place to do business because the corporate tax is low, no value-added tax, no sales tax, free market economics, low taxes. That's embedded into the fabric of this place. Look at all those low taxes doing their work, building up those skyscrapers, slapping on those bank logos all over town. So if the government isn't getting revenue from taxes, it really needs it from another source. And in the case of Hong Kong, that source is land sales.
So a lot of the government revenues here are driven by land revenues, and it's about 30% of government financing income.
The government of Hong Kong can lease out this land to developers at astronomical prices, make a ton of revenue from that, and not have to raise taxes on the people or the corporations that reside here. And they still proudly retain their ranking as the freest economy on earth. What this means is that the Hong Kong government doesn't have a huge incentive to free up more land and lower prices. But while this current arrangement of bidding and auctions is really good for revenue for the government and good for the market generally, it's not super good for the people of Hong Kong.
因為我仔係過度嘅 A 仔嚟㗎嘛，所以空間對於佢嚟講少咗少少，空氣唔夠空嘅對我身體都唔好嘅。
Of all the small spaces, this is easily the most cramped. These are coffin homes.
Can I ask you just a quick question about your living space?
一個人都話多個人用㗎。呢度一個月咧，呢個位2100。呢啲三餐大嘅，呢樣嘢喺香港啲住費都太貴。
The government is slowly working on this problem. Year after year, new policies come in that are meant to fix this, but they're slow to change, mainly because they have an incentive to keep the status quo as it is.
Out here at this industrial complex in Hong Kong, I met with a guy named Eric Wong, a local inventor and businessman who has seen a business opportunity in the midst of the space crisis. Eric grew up in Hong Kong and has been thinking about small space living for a long time.
其實喺我幾歲嘅時候，第一個 capsule 點樣嚟咧？我係屋企買咗一個雪櫃，一個新雪櫃有個支氣窗，咁我就介咗啲窗門玩佢。
Oh, it has Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there you go.
His capsules come in 1 or 2 person sizes and are meant to provide a more efficient and hygienic version of the cage and coffin rooms, all at a relatively low price.
呢啲款式都買過啦，我哋買到係唔使3000蚊一個間床，咁啊基本上你買張你可以 share 買張床都會貴過。
Down here, there's a little box where you can put all your valuables.
Okay, so there's mirror lights, there's reading lights.
But these capsules, as innovative as they are, really just put a band-aid on this housing problem. They don't serve as a real solution. A real solution would need to come from something that's much less profitable and fun to look at. government policy and zoning reform that will free up more land and put the interests of the people above the interests of the market. But until the government can make that happen, people in Hong Kong will continue to squeeze into smaller and smaller spaces.